Section 5 of Shadow Forms by ManlyPHall. The Third Eye. Bang! The shot echoed through the hotel in the dead silence of the winter night. A moment later there was a dull thud as of something falling, followed by the soft patter of footsteps in the hallway and a woman's half-broken sob. Then all was still again. The sound of the shot aroused everyone in the house. Doors opened, and frightened faces appeared in the frames of light. What has happened? Is someone killed? Was it a shot? I don't know, do you? From door to door the questions flew along the corridors like wildfire, but no one could answer them. Almost immediately Mr. Herbert Harrison, the house detective, appeared on the scene in a dressing gown. Where did the shot come from? He asked, addressing the question to the occupants of the nearest doorways. That is precisely the information with which we desire you to supply us, answered a distinguished-looking gentleman dressed in an iron-gray Van Dyke and blue nightshirt, giving the house detective a careful inspection through a gold pince-nez, and then vanishing in the direction of his wardrobe. Mr. Harrison looked along the hall at the startled faces. Then his glance fastened itself upon two doors, side by side at the extreme end of the corridor. They were the only two which had remained closed during the excitement. Many pairs of eyes followed the figure of the detective as he laid his course for these doors. In a moment he knocked sharply on one of them. He waited a moment and knocked again, but no answer came from within. He tried the door, but finding it locked, he turned his attention to the other. He rapped upon this also, but silence alone rewarded his effort. Trying this one and finding it unfastened, Harrison entered the room, closing the door behind him. Only an instant passed, although it seemed much longer to the watchers in the hall. Then the door reopened and the detective appeared, his face noticeably paler than when he entered. What was it? Asked several at once. Yes, reiterated the gentleman with the Van Dyke, who had reappeared upon the scene, a necktie and smoking jacket added to his raiment. We would be, much obliged if you would elucidate this perplexing problem. It looks like a case of murder, said Harrison, locking the door with his passkey. Go back to your rooms, everyone, and remain there until the police arrive. Without further word, the detective disappeared in the direction of the elevator. I wonder who the dead person is, asked a kindly-appearing old lady halfway down the hall. I don't know, came a shrill voice from another doorway, but I think it's just too romantic for words. Brr, muttered the distinguished gentleman with the Van Dyke, his knees shaking together. Really, if they must murder in this hotel, I would certainly consider it a favor if they would turn on the steam heat first. This is a most undesirable moment for a crime. As no one could cast any light upon the mystery, one by one the doors closed until the only sound breaking the stillness was a whisper which now and then was wafted through some keyhole. A half-hour later, 3 police detectives had arrived at the hotel. Harrison, now fully dressed, had gone with them to the room where the tragedy had occurred. Before them on the floor, illuminated by a reading lamp, lay the dead man, fully dressed, with a bullet hole in his back. There were no signs of weapons or of apparent motive for the crime. Nothing had been touched in the room, and as usual, the officers could not find the clue. One of the detectives turned to Harrison. Have you been able to secure any information concerning the murdered man? Very little, replied the detective. The name he signed on the hotel register was Professor Amos Martin. I hear he's a scientist and a globetrotter. I've also gathered from my examination here that he is an author, and connected with several well-known universities and research work. He is just back from a long stay in the Orient. These sheets on the table are the beginning of his latest book, which is entitled The Third Eye, and which looks very scientific. He seems to be basing it on some Eastern sacred writings or something like that. So far as I've been able to find out, he was not married, has no relatives, and is a long way from his original home. He appears to be well-fixed financially, and has been in the hotel 3 days short of a month. At the word Orient, the detectives pricked up their ears and looked at one another in a significant way. You say he was just back from the Far East? That is a very important point. Do you know whether there are any Orientals in this neighborhood at the present time, especially at this hotel? Yes, there is a Chinaman here who came soon after the professor arrived, who is supposed to be helping him finish his great book. He may have been with him last night. Where is his room? Asked one of the detectives. Wait a minute and I'll find out, replied Harrison as he stepped to the telephone near the door. While he was at the telephone, the other 3 walked over to the desk, upon which lay a great mass of typewritten manuscript. One of them picked up a sheet and read. third eye is a small ductless gland in the brain, known to modern science as the pineal gland. In India, China, and Tibet, I have come across great scientists who have so developed this gland, which is much more powerful than the physical eye, that they can see through solid walls and into the very secrets of the human mind. Muttered the detective, scratching his head. He continued to read. Few people realize the powers which work through this eye when it is awakened. If they did, greater attempts would be made to revivify this partly atrophied organ of cognition. This is only possible, according to those who have aroused this power, through the turning upward of the forces playing through the segments of the spinal canal. These forces dilate the gland, which then becomes a super organ of sense orientation. In the Eastern countries, much time has been spent in the awakening and training of this highly important gland, and the purpose of my book is to show the Western world the value of this little-known organ. The detective looked at his companions, then down at the dead man on the floor, a rather peculiar expression playing on his face. Then shrugging his shoulders, he held the paper under the light and resumed. There are superphysical powers known to the ancients which the Western world little understands, but these secrets are still in possession of certain priests and Eastern scientists whom I have met during my travel. It is of these mysterious ones that I would write. They are found most frequently in northern India, Burma, and China, and among the lamas of Tibet. They have powers of sight far beyond those of the average individual. Their lives as ascetics and hermits, and their self-sacrifices and rigid purification have given them control over their own being, and also over others, which is positively uncanny to those unacquainted with the hidden side of human nature and the powers of the universe. Tommy rot, laughed the officer, throwing the paper back among its fellows. Some people are getting dippy over this sort of stuff nowadays. And he looked like a nice, sane, sensible sort of man. The detectives gazed down on the face of the murdered scientist. But this is the way they all get when they delve into these things. They either go insane or get killed or something. At the same instant, the house detective turned away from the telephone. The Chinaman had the room right next to this one. I hear that he spent nearly all of his time with the professor, and was here with him up to a late hour last night. I'd like to get my hands on that chink now, exclaimed one of the other detectives. Almost immediately, there came a soft knock at the door. As Harrison swung it open, the men in the room were surprised to see a tall Chinese dressed in a long Mandarin gown of sober color but rich in texture. On his massive head was a tiny black cap, while a glorious peacock feather hung down his back. In his hand he carried a beautiful fan inlaid with mother of pearl. There was something uncanny about him. It was his face, however, which was most amazing. He had the brow of a philosopher, and his eyes, while almond-shaped, were wide apart and of such great size and brilliancy that they could be but partly concealed by the dark shell-rimmed glasses that he wore. Under his drooping mustache, his mouth was fixed in a true Oriental smile, a pleasant but absolutely blank expression which hinted many things but never committed itself. He spoke in a soft purring voice, in English worthy of a college-bred man. My honorable friend expresses a desire to see me, so I take great pleasure in coming. It is an honor to have my presence desired by important persons, such as house detectives, and you worthy gentlemen of the police. Somehow the thought came into the detectives' minds that this Oriental was deliberately ridiculing them, but his tone was so exemplary, and his manner so polite, that there was no excuse for taking offense, even though Harrison fancied, or was it merely his imagination, that he saw the upper lip of the Chinaman quiver slightly at times. Are you S? Asked the hotel detective sharply with a sense of personal discomfort, and a peculiar feeling of smallness which had crept over him since the entrance of this unusual Chinese. The Oriental bowed low. Ah, the honorable gentleman has taken the pains to learn my unworthy name. So much attention overwhelms me, and I can only reply by saying that I shall pray to my ancestors for your eternal salvation and the extension of your labors. Save your prayers for yourself, retorted Harrison. You may need them worse than I do in the near future. Ah, most honorable gentleman, refuse not the prayers of your lowly servant. And the Chinese bowed again. For in my country, prayers returned are often needed by those who give them back. At that instant, his eyes fell on the murdered man for the first time. Ah! He exclaimed, and his almost almond eyes became mere slits. Murdered? He turned to the detective. Oh, so many times I've warned him to be more careful, and told him what the immortal Confucius, the giver of all wisdom, said. But it was of no avail, it seems. Of what did you warn him? The Chinese tapped his jade thumb ring with his fan, and bowing low took the liberty of picking a small white thread from the inspector's coat sleeve before making a reply. Oh, only this, that he had certain weaknesses of which I was aware, and I've told him often that someday these little indiscretions would most likely cost him his life, and... The Chinese twisted his foot and gazed at the toe of it as it protruded from his Mandarin cape. And, he repeated, smiling blandly, it appears to have done so. Muttered one of the detectives. So our deceased client was subject to indiscretions. He turned to the Oriental and bowed sarcastically. Will you please be a little more explicit? The Chinese merely shrugged his shoulders, and with long, slender fingers picked up a sheet of paper from the table. It was the title page of the professor's book. I should advise my honorable friends of the detective force to secure a copy of this most esteemed work, should the gods decree that it ever be finished, for I am seriously afraid that the useful organ of which it treats is not properly developed in the brain of our most worthy friend, the hotel detective. The detectives exchanged glances, not quite sure how to act with this Oriental, who it now seemed was also slightly unbalanced. But as they themselves had nothing to work on in the form of information, they tacitly decided that they could not be any worse off by allowing the Chinese to continue. Do you know who murdered him? Demanded Harrison. No, answered the Oriental as he opened his magnificent fan to blow away some of the smoke from a none too mild cigar which one of the detectives was smoking. But I think I can find out for you if you wish me to do so. The detectives again looked at one another, then one of them spoke. Go on, but remember that whatever you say here may be used against you. Oh, I don't think it will be, replied the Oriental. For this is a matter between honorable friends, and as gentlemen I am going to ask you to forget what I have said when I go. In fact, to make this easier, I shall even assist you in the forgetting. The Oriental walked to the center of the room, and removing his black cap with its gorgeous peacock feather, he hunched his shoulders and bent his back until the dome of his massive head was pointed directly at the dead man. The detectives then saw that the top of his head was shaven clean for an area about the size of a silver dollar, and that on this spot a small green snake was traced in dark pigment. With his eyes closed and the crown of his head pointing first in this direction and then in that, the Chinese noiselessly slipped about the room. Finally he spoke in his soft musical voice. It was precisely as I feared. A lady called upon the professor, my esteemed friend, last evening. How many times have I warned my worthy brother of letters, even going to the extremity of presenting him with a beautiful book of proverbs by Lao Tse, and underlining in red those pertaining to his indiscretions. It was not the first visit of the fair lady, but she had married, and had come to tell the professor that their friendship must be at an end. My honorable friend was so unwise, he could not understand the warnings that I gave him, although I have prayed to my ancestors to preserve him. He and the lady had a little, shall we say, misunderstanding. There was a slight struggle, which would not have occurred had he been a Chinese gentleman. My worthy friend, losing his temper, knocked the lady down with undue expression of Western energy, unpardonable in the East, and turned his back. Now it seems that the lady's husband, whose work requires him to be prepared for any emergency, had let her take one of his revolvers, so that she might defend herself from burglars or other intruders. She had brought this with her, and when my unfortunate friend turned his back, she shot him, and dropping the revolver with a cry, ran from the room. That's a very pretty story, sneered one of the detectives. But you forgot one thing, Chinky. Where's the gun? It is not far away, suavely answered the Chinese. He turned his head from side to side in an arc, which steadily decreased in extent until it stopped opposite Mr. Herbert Harrison. It is in the inside coat pocket of this gentleman, the lady's husband. End of Section 5. Section 6 of Shadow Forms by ManlyPHall. The Spirit of the Snows, as told by an old prospector.
Yes, sir. I've been through more than most of 'em in this here country, but I don't mind telling you, partner, I'm down on my luck. If you'll stake me, I'll give it back to you some of these days when I strike mine. Honest, I will.
The old man leaned over the little table, a strange, pathetic expression in his big gray eyes. He was a sourdough from the creeks, was honest Jim Harley, as straight and honest a man as ever come over the trail. He was a typical Alaskan as the country was in the days of its glory, for though he was rough and unkempt, with grizzly beard and matted hair, Jim Harley was a gentleman from the boots up. He hadn't been very long in our camp and didn't seem to have many friends. It was whispered around that he was a man who had been something once, but he had had some kind of trouble that made him want to get away where no one would talk to him about the past. There was a queer little Jap named Heruku who helped him work his claims. They'd first met on a boat coming up the inside passage. Heruku had a lot of Japanese stories and legends that he would tell when he wasn't working to anybody that would listen. Jim Harley was allus fond of that kind of stuff. People used to say he was queer. And after one night when the northern lights flashed out looking like wondrous arches of coral in the sky and strange temples of gleaming fire streaked down and wavy lace curtains of light streamed across the heavens, everybody said he was crazy. After that, they called him Poor Jim Harley. This evening, Jim and me was setting in my cabin after a whale of a storm, but it had cleared off and looked as if we might have pleasant weather for a spell. I always felt sorry for him, so when he asked me for a steak, I handed him a 20.
Now, Bill, I sure am obliged to you, 'cause soon as summer comes, I'm going up in the country again, back dar in them mountains. But you know I never go up while the snow is on. No, sir, it's 20 years since I've been outdoor while it was snowing. If you'll shove up a little closer, I'll tell you what happened to me in the big snowstorm in '99 when Heruku, Rosie, and I was staking it in Nugget Creek. Well, sir, it was evening, and I'll plumb forget what the wife was doing, poor kid, when Heruku and I was sitting close to the stove, close as we could get, for that was the coldest snap of the year, and the snow was heaping up over the roof of our little shack. The alcohol was down 60 below, and even the malamutes was shut up, and all you could hear was the cracking of the logs. Why, you could purty nigh see 'em move, she was getting that cold. But I must tell you about Heruku first. He was a strange feller, that little Japanese. Yes, sir, as white a soul as I ever met, and no fool neither. You know, I ain't never been a religious man or nothing like that. In fact, I couldn't tell you the names of saints from sardine labels today. Of course, I knew 'em then, but it seems as though I've forgotten everything, Bill. Everything but that night. But I can tell you, I never felt in all my life so much like religion as when that little Japanese was around. He used to tell stories about Buddha and the ways of the holy men in Japan and the East. And you know, I got so I lived better and felt better every time Heruku was around me. Well, we was a-setting there, and he was a-telling me one of the most beautiful legend stories I ever heard in my life. Just then an awful heavy wind started to sigh and cry, and above it all a strange tapping sound come at the door of the cabin. I swear the little Japanese turned white, and I was powerful frightened myself, 'cause we both knew that there was 6 feet of snow in front of that door. Gently the tapping sounded again. "Yuki Ona," whispered the Japanese, grasping me by the arm. "I've heard it before, and I know what it means." "What is it?" I asked, dumbfounded. "It's the Lady of the Snows," he whispered. "She come through the silence of the storm, and death comes with her. Silently she tap. You can barely hear the gentle rapping, but she will come in before the morning and kiss one of us to everlasting sleep." I turned to the Jap to see if he was in earnest, and one look at his staring eyes and drawn face told me that he meant every word he said. "Ain't ye never heard o' the Lady o' the Snows?" he whispered as the gently tapping kept a-sounding. "Who steals softly with fluttering garments and closes the eyes of those who die in the storm? She is Yuki Ona, the Lady of White, and when she taps one must go forth to join the spirits of the snow." For some minutes we sat in silence, and slowly the head of the little Japanese sunk on his chest, and I felt a funny sort of drowsiness a-creeping over me too, which I couldn't understand. I tried to sit up, but couldn't, and little by little my head too sunk on my breast and I seemed to fall asleep. But though I couldn't move, my eyes was open and I could see what was happening around me. The tapping continued softly on the door, and I saw the wooden beam that closed it move slowly from the old wooden socket, and gently, oh, how gently, the door opened. And in there poured an avalanche of snow, swirling, twisting, and turning, fanned by the wings of the storm. Then gradually, out of the snow appeared a strange creature. A woman of shining white, robed in glistening, gleaming snowflakes. Her skin was as white as her garments, as white as the glorious pearly waves of her hair. Yes, she was indeed a creature of snow, yet alive. She didn't have any feet, for her body trailed off in a swirl of snowflakes as she seemed to float and flutter in the cabin doorway. Without a sound, she glided in, and I felt a strange chill come over me as she leaned over Haruko and me. A strange chill like that of the cold snow that marked her coming. And I remembered the time when I had been lost on the trail with my dogs dead and the grub gone, for the same chill crept over me now as then. Slowly the floating form passed on and paused before the door that led to the other room. A great fear gnawed at my soul, and in terror I tried to move. Was this white specter going to claim the one I loved? I couldn't stir, and all I could do was to watch in agony. The door opened little by little, and a figure of blinding snowflakes passed in. Only a few minutes went by, and then the door opened again. But there was 2 shining figures instead of 1. I give a scream of mortal agony, for my wife was the second figure of shining snowflakes that went out into the world of swirling death and gleaming sleet. Then the door closed, and the room seemed just as it had been before. It was just about that time that something snapped in me, and all went black. When I come to, I found Haruko trying to bring me back to consciousness. The first words I asked him was, "A Rosie," and he sadly shook his head. "Yukiona has took her away," he whispered softly. And true enough, the girl I loved was dead, stolen away by that cursed spirit of the snow. An open shutter, a frozen form, a room filled with swirling snowflakes was all that remained to tell of the tragedy of my life. Well, sir, I told Haruko how the second figure had gone with the first. "Yes," he said, "she has gone forever. She has become another spirit of the snow. For all who die in the frozen Northlands become spirit of the snow and live forever in the soft and crystal whiteness of the snowflakes." Well, sir, that's my story. Yes, sir, and it's true. I ain't never been the same since that night, Bill, for my Rosie took my heart with her out there into the snow, out there into the wintry night, where she now lives forever as one of the spirits of the snow. So I never go out into the snowstorm now, 'cause I don't want to see her out there, living, dancing, swaying in her robes of shining colors, and like Yukiona, kissing the wanderers to sleep as they join her in rendezvous with death. She's there, partner. She's there. And somehow I know that someday I'll be with her out in that eternal whiteness. I know you think I'm crazy, Bill. They all do, but I ain't. It's God's gospel truth. But thanks for the poke, partner. I'm a-going out soon as the snow clears to stake a richin' in them mountains. 'Cause I know it's there, and I want all kinds of money. Yes, sir. Just to pay up all my friends that have been kind to me. And when I find that big stake, it's going to be worth millions. And I'm going to stake you a quarter interest, partner, for the 20 you lent me tonight. Goodbye, partner. I must be a-going. I want to get a plug, a horseshoe at the company store. God bless you, Bill, and whatever you do. When you go out in the snow, remember, Yukiona who'll come sure as fate, and you'll hear her knocking at your cabin door." Jim Harley staggered to his feet and, pulling his rough hat down over his matted hair, lurched out into the cold Alaskan night. And that's the last time Jim Harley was ever seen alive, when he left my cabin door. He hadn't been gone but a few minutes when the blizzard broke again, blinding sheets of snow and swirling sleet that lasted for many hours. When it stopped and the temperature went up, they found Jim Harley dead in the snow just a few rods from my cabin. His face had a happy look, so I kind of reckon the Lady of the Snow must have found Jim too. And as her white form bent over him and her cold lips rested on his forehead, I kind of guess he must have looked up and seen the face of his Rosie who died so many years before. I'm just a-saying that 'cause he looked so happy. Every time it snows, I can't help but think that maybe the spirits of Jim Harley and his Rosie are somewheres among the snowflakes. There ain't no telling. Maybe one of these days I'll wander out in the snow, getting adrift on the Great White Pass or lined up on the White Horse. Maybe I'll be out there somewheres with Jim Harley and Rosie, because Haruku says that all who die in the snow live on forever in the snowflakes. End of Section 6. Section 7 of Shadow Forms by ManlyPHall. The Lota of the Great God Shiva. His Holiness, Sri Brahma Radhavan Gupta, sat under his umbrella of woven rattan on the lowest steps of the Manikarnika Ghat. The Ganges River, murky with the ashes of the dead, flowed at his feet, and the smoke from the burning funeral pyres enveloped him. The great saint was far advanced in years. His long unkempt hair streamed about his shoulders, and a matted white beard hung down upon his breast. On his forehead was a complicated caste mark, which added to the strangeness of his appearance. His Holiness wore for clothing a simple yellow cloth, and from his shoulders hung many necklaces and rosaries of wooden beads, worn smooth by incessant handling. His feet were crossed under him in true Oriental fashion, and in his lap rested a book written in some unknown language upon strips of specially prepared palm leaves. He turned the pages slowly, murmuring mantras. On the ground beside the aged ascetic were grouped all of his earthly possessions. A little bundle containing a nondescript collection of sacred relics and some scanty provisions lay open at his left. To the right, and shaded by the great umbrella, stood his water lota. It was of most peculiar shape and extraordinary pattern. It was much larger than the brass bowls usually carried by holy men. Such a cup with a crudely shaped spoon is part of the equipment of every wandering mendicant, who fills it from the muddy waters of the sacred river. Then, climbing long flights of steps which lead to the shrines far up on the bank of the Ganges, they dip their spoons into the sanctified water, and throw it upon the great stone lingams that stand at intervals along the riverfront. The Lota of Raghavan Gupta was a sacred relic. Only two knew the history of it, and understood its magical powers. The great saint himself and a certain Hassan Ali, a Mohammedan who guided tourists. The sacred bowl had belonged to the great god Shiva, while he walked the earth a religious mendicant. When he returned to heaven, Shiva bestowed it upon one of his faithful disciples. After many generations, it came into the possession of the great sage sitting under the reed umbrella. The strange urn-shaped bowl, with its intricately carved cover, had the magic power of absorbing into itself all liquids with which it came in contact. When the great Shiva was wandering in the desert, he was wont to lay the lota upon the sand, and it would draw water from far beneath the surface, so that it would become immediately full. If he placed it near wine jars, the liquid passed from the earthen containers into the magic lota. Whoever owned it was never thirsty. Along the stone-paved ghats, a group of tourists were coming, a motley group, most of them away from home for the first time. They listened with open-mouthed wonder to the skillful lying of their beturbaned guide. This personage, of exotic and swarthy appearance, was attired in native white bloomer pants and gray Norfolk jacket. He wore an English shirt, and color was lent to his attire by a red necktie. It was Hassan Ali. Passing the umbrella under which sat the Eastern Master with the sacred lota beside him, Hassan gazed enviously at the meditating figure. He cared nothing for holy men, but he knew wealthy travelers who would pay many thousands of rupees for the brass water bowl. The Hindu saint raised his eyes and gazed contemptuously into the sinister face of the guide. Then, turning to a disciple who sat cross-legged a little way off, Raghavan Gupta muttered, "I like not the looks of yonder infidel. He desires my sacred water lota. Someday he will try to steal it, but let him beware, for such relics are not for his unclean hands." About 2 weeks later, Hassan Ali had his chance. A holy Brahmin who had sat for many years on a bed of spikes in a neighboring temple had just died, and a procession was forming. At its head were 6 men carrying on a litter the body of the deceased, seated on a rough throne covered with wreaths of native flowers. The tourists gathered to watch the burial. Holy men are too sacred to be burned, and are allowed to float on rough barges down the slowly flowing river to the sea. The only one who seemed unmoved by the growing excitement was the great saint under his rattan umbrella. Soon he was deserted, left sitting alone on the steps of the ghat, for even his disciples had joined the throng gathering to watch the last rites for the dead Brahmin.
Raghavan Gupta stirred uneasily. His sensitive mind had picked up a thought from somewhere in the ethers. Leaning over, he reached out and, grasping the great lota, he poured its contents into the Ganges that flowed at his feet. He replaced it inverted beside him so that the open mouth faced the ground. He then laid the lid by its side. "Now it will hold nothing," he murmured, and resumed his labor of contemplation. A few minutes later, a long claw-like brown hand reached out from behind the umbrella. It was the hand of Hassan Ali. As silently as a ghost, he had crept up from the rear, and was concealed from sight by the immense tilted sunshade. With one quick motion, he drew the lota out of sight, and with another he picked up the lid, placed it upon the bowl, and turning, crept away a few yards. It was then that one of the disciples of the great saint saw him with the master's water bowl. Running to the guru, he cried out, "O most holy one! That villainous guide is now running away among the crowd with your lota." The aged ascetic bowed his head. "I knew he would do that, for his thought came to me through the air, so I emptied the vessel. Follow him, and you will behold a miracle, for the sacred lota is well able to protect itself." With a bow, the shaven-headed youth vanished in the direction with which he had seen Hassan Ali take. That worthy individual, discovering that he was followed, opened his shirt and, hiding the lota therein, ran quickly into the twisted streets lined with bazaars. From the streets of the silversmiths he passed into the thoroughfare of the rug-makers. He dodged behind a shrine of Kali, which was still splashed with the blood of the morning offering, and vanished in the direction of the mosque of Aurangzeb. The disciple followed him with an ease that was almost uncanny. He seemed to sense the fleeing thief and was never more than a few yards behind. Suddenly, over Hassan Ali there came a strange feeling. His feet began to drag. His knees wobbled under him. He felt that he must sit down and rest. Never before had that strong, wiry man been so exhausted. The landscape around him grew dim and hazy. The streets began to sway. The passer-by assumed distorted shapes. The ground seemed to drop from under him. Suddenly he stumbled. He tried in vain to retain his balance. The stones beneath rose up like mighty boulders, and without a sound he collapsed in the road, directly in front of a shop owned and run by a cashmere silk dealer. When the white-robed Chella reached his side and leaned over him, Hassan Ali was faintly conscious of two eyes gazing down into his, and then all grew black forever. Opening the front of his shirt, the Chella took from the recumbent form the lota of strangely carved brass. He was surprised at its weight, but without lifting the lid, he held it reverently before him, and returned to the great saint who still sat in peaceful contemplation under his umbrella.
"Master, it was as you said. A miracle has occurred, for the thief suddenly fell on the street. When I came up to him, his face was pale and drawn, and his eyes were glassy. He was dying, and before I could pluck the lota from within his shirt, he had ceased to breathe."
Taking the bowl from the hand of his disciple, the aged holy man noted its added weight. "As I thought," murmured Raghavan Gupta. "This lota draws to itself whatever liquid may be near it. For that reason I emptied it when I knew that foul reprobate, Hassan Ali, was about to steal it. He hid it next to his heart. Behold!" Opening the brass urn, the holy man leaned over to pour its contents into the Ganges. The Chella watched his actions, suddenly uttered a cry of horror. The lota was filled with blood. End of section 7. Section 8 of Shadow Forms by ManlyPHall. The Temple of Sin. In the heart of Chinese Mongolia, that little-known land of magic and sorcery, stands a strange red and yellow pagoda-like building. It is concealed in the wastes of a mighty range of mountains where white men seldom travel, and is almost a myth even to the natives themselves. From the corners of this grotesque structure hang strange lanterns of bamboo and silk, bearing upon them oriental designs and crude Chinese characters. A great flight of granite steps leads sheer up from the valley below, through an avenue of tablets, and at last ends in a lattice-work door carved and lacquered in designs of dragons and gloriously plumed pheasants. On either side of the gate of this lonely temple stands a great dog of grotesquely colored porcelain, and on the base of each pillar where they stand is written one word. The dog upon the right carries the name Mirth, and the one on the left, Wrath. For many years, these two animals, with their glistening porcelain bodies and heads maned like lions, their sharp teeth gleaming and their great eyes staring, have stood guard at the entrance to the Temple of Sin, one of the strangest of the mysterious remnants of forgotten ages. This temple is served and upheld by a small group of priests who stand firmly among the tottering creeds of ancient days, guarding with fanatical faith this temple built by the hands of the gods to mark the place where the first man sinned on earth. The high priest of this temple is a most unusual personage, a tall, gaunt Chinese of angular and sinister frame, dressed in robes of yellow broadcloth, ornately brocaded with flowers and edged with a crimson border. He wears upon his back a great Chinese symbol, which means, when translated, immortality forever. And upon the chest of his garment, another which signifies mortality unbroken. No one knows the age of this Chinese priest, but tradition says it can be counted in hundreds of years. And as you look down at his wizened face, dried, seamed, and browned, you can well believe that he really is as old as those barren mountains and withered lands that surround the temple. They say that this spot is shunned like a death area, for since the beginning of time it was meant to be visited by the sinners of the world only. The old priest, with his hands crossed in his sleeves, was walking softly up and down behind the latticework of elaborately carved and gilded teak. A faint odor of incense was borne outward by the gentle breeze, filling the air with the pungent aroma of burning sandalwood, while now and then the dull boom of a temple gong told that the services of the gods were not forgotten, and that the priests were gathered to pray. Suddenly the old man held up a long finger, its nail encrusted with gold, and curling some 3 inches beyond the fingertip. His wizened, slanty eyes opened wide, and their whites, yellowed with age, shone like pieces of amber. "Someone is coming over the pass of death," he whispered, pointing south. As he spoke, the priests in their yellow robes gathered around him and looked where his finger indicated. And truly enough, a thin line of dark forms could be seen in the distance, winding in and out among the hills. The aged Oriental looked long and earnestly. "He is a white man," he said, after a while, "and he comes with a pack train. He is seeking rugs, rare silks, and precious cargoes. Beware, lest he rob the temple. Close all the doors, save one, and let the guardian dogs watch his passing." The monks bowed silently, and folding their arms in their sleeves, vanished like shadows in the temple passageway. The old priest turned and entered the shrine room, the tinkling bells and jangling ornaments of his golden helmet sounding musically as he walked. Passing over the floor, soft with furs and precious rugs, he opened the doors of a small shrine, and there before him, clasped in the claws of a teakwood dragon, stood a tiny mirror. It shone and gleamed with a depthless light, and from its burnished surface were reflected many little flames that burned in sockets on the wall. The old priest bent his great hunched shoulders forward, and his queue, braided with silken cords, fell over one shoulder. "Oh, mirror of Kwang Ke, creator of all that is, first being of all earth, there comes over yonder desert one who, my soul whispers, is seeking to desecrate thy shrine." He raised his thumb, which bore upon it a great ring of jade, and, closing the doors, placed over the crack where they joined a soft wax pellet, upon which he pressed the signet ring, leaving stamped there the cipher of the Emperor. "By the jade of the first dynasty, may the Emperor of gods protect the shrine of this sacred mirror. May the 5-clawed dragon twine himself round this altar, that the defiler may not enter, for it is not the will of the gods that the mirror of sin shall be stolen." Then turning, he passed from the room as silently as a yellow spectre, and out into the courtyard of the temple. At about the same time, Hank Nicholson, buyer and importer representing one of our largest Fifth Avenue stores, put his foot on the lowest step of the temple. Hank Nicholson was a bad man, but he always valued his bravado more than anyone else did. He unclipped his revolver holster and with a hitch of his belt leaped up the steps towards the porcelain dogs, one of which grinned while the other leered in stony salutation. Hank spoke fairly good Chinese and several dialects, and soon made himself understood. "I heard about this outfit in Peking. I'm looking for rugs and curios. Any good teak wood, ivory, hammered brass, or idols that you may have around. Sabi? Hank held up a string of Chinese money and shook it under the nose of the aged Oriental, in whose eyes was a strange glint, but who kept perfectly poised as he gazed into the flat face in front of him and surveyed the shock of red hair that was Hank's crowning glory. He then spoke slowly. This is no place of merchandise, of gold or silver or of ivory. This is the temple of a true god, and has been known for ages as the chapel of the first sin. Here I live with a small group of priests, having no intercourse with the world of men. It is useless for you to seek here, since I have nothing to barter, to buy, or to sell. I am a servant of God, and not a silversmith. Oh, bosh and nonsense, exclaimed Hank. I've heard that before. How many mechs for the whole damn temple and everything in it? Except for you. I'm looking for antiques and curios, but don't want anything as funny as you. Come on, Chinky, get out of the way and let's see what you got. The Oriental bowed patiently and, stepping aside, allowed the exponent of Western diplomacy to enter. Hank stood in the inner doorway, arms akimbo, and viewed the surroundings with an air of complacency. I'll get $500,000 for this on Broadway, he announced confidently. How much, Chinky? I have told you, white man, I have nothing to sell. Hank pressed with the toe of his shoe a rug before him. That's a fine rug, Chinky. Looks like a piece of genuine Tibet silk. You got some good teak wood here, too. I'll have some of my men come right in and pack it up. The priest bowed with great deference, but there was a wicked glint in his beady black eyes. I must remind the white man of what I said before. This is a temple of God, and not a curio store. God will defend his temple. The American laughed. A fine bunch of gods you got, Chinky. I own 3 of them that I used for boot jacks, and they haven't answered me back yet. Don't get sentimental with your religion now, because when Hank Nicholson wants something, he gets it, see? And Hank pulled out his revolver and nestled it against the priest's side. The Oriental looked mildly down on the gun and replied, 3 times have I enjoyed white man's civility, and, alas, it has always been the same. The first white man I entertained stole my jades. The second robbed me of my temple maiden. And you, honorable sir, would take the building and all. I fear you must come to China and learn manners. Hank stood nonplussed for a moment, and then turned back to look over the room. Gazing around, his eye rested upon the shrine bearing on its closed doors the waxen seal. What's that? He demanded. In yonder shrine, was the reply, is the mirror of sin made upon the eyeball of the god of light. It is the most precious thing in all China, and rests in the claws of the sacred dragon. Those who have endured great agony and wish to expiate their guilt come from all parts of the world to pay homage to this mirror, for as they gaze into its depths, they can see the reason for their suffering and are shown the sins for which they are accursed. Oh, said Hank. A mirror with a story like that would bring $10,000 on Broadway. I know not what your wide avenue is, answered the priest, but if it be a place, the mirror shall not rest there. In my hands I carry a temple bell. If you do not leave this holy place at once, I shall ring for my priests, and, if I so order them, they will slay you where you stand, and sever your body into as many pieces as yon chrysanthemum has petals. Recognizing the flint in the old man's voice, Hank decided to retreat. He passed silently down the steps and out of the temple, but in his mind a plan was formulating, a plan such as has thrilled the hearts of practically every robber developed by Western civilization. The American withdrew a little distance where he made camp and the coolies unpacked their burdens. As evening fell and shrouded the temple with its mystic lattice work, a gleaming spark a few hundred feet away marked the resting place of Hank Nicholson and his pack train. Slowly the monks filed out of the place of worship and into the little huts among the rocks, where they slept and prayed. And lastly, the old high priest, swinging together the temple grating, glided like a phantom from the shrine. There was no moon that night, but the stars shone down and lighted the earth with 1,000,000 points of light. When a chill breeze told of coming dawn, Hank unrolled his blanket and in the darkness crept across the sand, among the rocks, towards the gate of the Temple of Sin. The 2 porcelain dogs looked down in silence as he passed between them, and stood before the hand-carved wooden grating. An ancient lock secured the door, but this he quickly mastered, and a little later was creeping stealthily into the inner shrine. The flickering oil lamp still dimly lighted the room. With an expression of diabolical greed on his face, Hank rolled up rug after rug, and his itching fingers played lovingly over the rare porcelains and carvings. At last his eye rested on the shrine, and something irresistible drew him over towards it.
"So the old Chinaman says," muttered Hank, "that whoever looks into that mirror can see past before him all the sins he ever committed. That's a fine story, but I'll wager it won't show up some of the little private secrets in my life."
He looked at the seal of wax for several seconds, and then grasping the two lower handles drew open the door, breaking the seal. In the alcove stood the mirror, a gleaming mother of pearl held between the claws of the great dragon, like some diamond in a Tiffany setting. A pale glow radiated from it, and the American gazed into it in spite of himself. As he did so, he shrank back in amazement. A scene was unrolling itself before him. Suddenly, Hank Nicholson gave a scream, and covering his eyes with his hands, dashed madly from the room, uttering cries like a madman.
"No! No! God, not that! That wasn't me!"
And his hurrying footsteps sounded on the steps of the temple while the grated door closed silently behind him. From the gloom which bordered the edge of the room emerged a silent figure, his hands clasped in the sleeves of his coat. The old priest's eyes followed the American. Then kneeling before the mirror, he muttered, "None there are who can gaze unafraid into the mirror of sin. None can desecrate the holy temple of God and escape." From out of the night, a great moaning howl broke the stillness, the cry of a great dog sounding weird and eerie in the silence. With it came a scream of mortal agony, and then all was quiet. The priest, carrying a little lamp in his hand, passed out from under the gates of the temple, and a gleaming light was reflected from the great porcelain dogs that guarded the threshold. For a brief moment, the stoic complacency of his face was broken, and then his amber eyes narrowed again. Hanging in the air, clenched between the teeth of the porcelain dog called Wrath, was the figure of the American buyer. And there it remained until the vultures came. None knew how it happened to be there, held tightly by the great fangs of the image. But to this day the story is told, and the great dog with the red blood stains upon its mouth and teeth still stands as the silent guardian at the gate of the Temple of Sin. End of Section 8.